Here are 7 essential items you need when you're starting a nonprofit. Let's get into it. Hey y'all, this is Tiffany with Boss on a Budget. So I help people start their nonprofits and raise money from the ground up. If you're looking for a private community of nonprofit founders like you raising money, you can join my Activate Your Purpose and Profit membership society, and you can get help with weekly challenges and assistance with your fundraising. If you want to join, just comment join below. In this video, I'm going to do a quick rundown of essential items you need to have to be prepared to do the paperwork for starting your nonprofit. If you follow my channel, you know that I produce a lot of content on starting a nonprofit. I did a video that's about 40 minutes long talking about how to start a nonprofit. You should absolutely go to that video and watch it. And also, I have a free startup checklist that helps walk you through that video as well. So if you want that, comment checklist below. I want to give a disclaimer that this video is for people who are seeking 501c3 status. Just know that there are other nonprofits that don't have 501c3 status. Just had to put that out there. If you don't understand that, then watch this video that I'm linking above to help you through that process. Here are 7 things you need to think about having in place. So number 1, you need to have an idea of your mission and your purpose. And the reason why I'm saying that is because in every document that you're going to have to fill out with the state or with the IRS, you're going to have to state your mission and state your purpose. The reason why they want this information is because they're trying to assess whether or not your stated mission or purpose really does fit what a nonprofit is supposed to do. When you're trying to get 501c3 status, the IRS needs to make sure that the purpose of your organization fits the definition that meets their standards for that status. It's important for you to have a mission statement for your organization. If you need help writing a mission statement, I recorded a video that can help you go through that process, but it's essentially who you serve, what you do, and why it's important. And it should be in a really succinct statement. It does not need to be more than 2 sentences. Try to get it into 1 sentence, and it should sum up the essence of your organization. Just note, when you're applying for 501c3 status, in the IRS instructions, they do say that you don't need to repeat your mission statement when you're telling them your charitable purpose, but essentially it should describe what you do and the activities you want to carry out. They really need to understand what your activities will be so they can make the best decision to determine if you fit the criteria for being tax exempt. Number 2 is your board. And some of you watching this are going to be surprised to hear me say this because you're new to this. But if the question is, do I really need a board? The answer is yes. You do need a board, and the IRS likes to see that you have at least 3 board members for your organization when you're applying for 501c3 status. Now, I fully recognize that in the beginning, you're going to be putting family and friends as your board members because you need to put somebody on the paperwork to go through the process. On this channel, we keep it real, but I also help give you advice for how to become more sustainable. So you can start with family and friends, but I really advise you to think about the right team you need in place to execute your vision. And in most circumstances, it's not your family or your friends. And even if your family or your friends have the skill sets that you need to help execute, the messiness of it all, the messiness of having family and friends on a board, the strained relationships that happen as a result of having family and friends on your board, it's not worth it. So as much as you can, be realistic about recruiting new people onto your board who have the skill sets, they have the experience that you need to be able to carry out your mission. I talk a lot about your startup board. I recorded a recent video that I'm linking above to help give you advice for what to ask or how to seek out board members. Just keep in mind that when you're picking your board, these people are legally responsible and they're responsible for the decisions that are made on behalf of the organization. So whatever direction you decide to take, whatever key decisions your organization makes, they are on the hook for those. They sign their name to be basically trustees of the organization, and they need to take that role seriously. Too many times, because people know they need board members for their paperwork, they may feel like, oh, I'm just going to use this person in name only, and I'm going to do my thing, and I just need them to sign their name. And I get it, but you really need to think about the true purpose of having a board and understanding what that means for those people when they sign their name on those documents. Also, I want you to keep in mind that your state probably has a law that speaks to your board and how your board is supposed to operate. So it'll speak to the minimum number of board members required. It'll speak to the required officers or terms for board members. So you really do need to be looking at nonprofit law or the code in the state that you incorporate in to make sure you're following state rules as well. Number 3 is your address. So you need some kind of business address that you're going to put on documentation. When you fill out your articles of incorporation, check out this video above if you have no idea what that is. When you fill out your articles of incorporation for your nonprofit, you're going to have to put the business address. When you apply for 501c3 status, you're also going to have to put your business address. And when it comes to the documentation that you submit to the IRS, that information is public. That information can be easily found out. So I really advise that if you do not want your home address or any particular address on public record or on the internet, then you identify another address that you want to use as the official place or residence of your organization. You can get a virtual address to serve as your business address, but just keep in mind that if you want to use a virtual address for different purposes, like getting business funding or applying for like a DUNS number or something like that, then they may have issues with the type of addresses that you use. So just keep in mind that as you're picking your address, what you really need it for, not just in the here and now, but long term. And of course, you can switch it out and change as time goes on. But always remember that what you're putting with the IRS documentation is public. So if you don't want certain information public, then you don't want to put that on that application. Number 4 is a resident agent. So the typical process in a state is that you need to identify a resident agent when you are starting a business. And a resident agent is a person who can receive official or legal correspondence on the behalf of your organization. The resident agent has to have a physical presence in your state. Why? Because they need to receive documentation at any moment in time. So the resident agent needs to be a person who during the day can receive correspondence. And even if there's not a heads up about that correspondence, will be in that location to receive that information whenever it's sent. So there are services that provide resident agents for you. So for example, sometimes people incorporate in a different state than where they live, and you typically need to have a resident agent, like I said, in that state. So you can pay somebody to be a resident agent to receive your official documentation. And a lot of times with resident agents, they also have an address associated with them. So you can knock out 2 things at once. You can get a resident agent and also an address if you don't want your personal address to be public on the documentation. Number 5 is you need to have a good understanding of your state process, your state documents and forms, and the fees associated with it. So that was a doozy. I just kind of coupled all that together, but it's really important for you to know the requirements for your state level. A lot of people think that all they have to do is get their EIN, and then somehow through the EIN process, they get their 501c3 status, and don't realize that when you're starting a nonprofit, in most circumstances, you're starting a nonprofit corporation. So that means you're starting a business, and you start businesses in a state. And it can be whatever state you pick or whatever one you feel is the best for your organization, but it has to start there. So you need to understand, well, what are the requirements in that particular state that I want to incorporate in? Because every state has a different form number. Every state has a different set of fees. Sometimes people will message me or they'll comment on a video and they'll say, hey, I got form SL2 such and such, and what am I supposed to put on this? And I immediately know when they ask me a question like that it's a state form, because I don't necessarily recognize the number. But a lot of people assume that just because what their process is in their state is that, then it's the same for everybody else. So what you got to keep in mind is that every state is different, and there are some requirements that are a lot more stringent and a lot more detailed and lengthy than in other states. So I recently did a video on how to start a nonprofit in Georgia, and let me tell you, It is a lot compared to other states. So you got to prepare yourself and do your research to know what is required in your state. Sometimes you have to put a notice out there to let people know you've started the organization. You may have to publish something in a paper. You may have to fill out another form 30 days after you start your organization, and you may get a penalty as a result if you don't do that. So do your research before you start doing your paperwork and understand all the state forms that are required and the deadlines and things like that. The best place to start with trying to figure that out is your Secretary of State's office. In most states, that is the office that helps people start businesses. They are the key government organization that works with new businesses or helps with compliance with businesses. So start with the Secretary of State's office and go from there. Number 6 is sort of optional. So it is bylaws and particular policies. So what are bylaws? Bylaws are the governing document. And I struggle because I don't know if it's plural or singular. So y'all just gonna get whatever sounds good right now. But bylaws is the document that basically sets out the rules for how the board is supposed to operate. So the bylaws are like the overarching rules for the organization. When you get started with your organization, you start hiring staff, you're going to have certain policies that speak to how you operate, that speak to your programming. But the bylaws really more so speak to your infrastructure. They really speak to your governing structure. So they talk about what your purpose is. They talk about requirements for your board, term limits for your board, what's required to have a vote for your board, what are certain things that certain board members can vote on without all the other board members there, what are particular committees that are required to be in place. Things like that are typically in your bylaws, and they're more high level. So I like to think about the bylaws like the Constitution of the United States. They're like the overarching rules that we always refer to, but they are set in stone because they're the more high level, like this is what it is. And it takes a lot to change the Constitution. And it's the same kind of process with the bylaws. It should take a lot to move or change what's in your bylaws. So whatever you put in there really needs to be thought about and be intentional for the long term. So you want to consider thinking through your bylaws and having them in place. Now, here's the thing. You're not necessarily required to have bylaws. Some states may require you to have bylaws, and some states may require bylaws for you to do certain things like apply for charitable solicitation, right? But not across the board are you necessarily required to have them. It's highly recommended that you have them because when there are questions about how do you get rid of a board member or what do you do in this situation, you really need like a standard. You really need something to refer to know what to do and to cover yourself. So if it's questioned in court, you have something to back it up. So you really should have bylaws in place, but you don't necessarily need to have them before you apply for 501c3 status unless your state requires you to have them and they need to see them or they want you to affirm that you've created them. The IRS actually asks you to submit the bylaws if you have them, if you're using the long form, and if you're using the short form, which is the 1023-EZ, they don't require you to submit your bylaws at all. But I'm just saying that it's really important for you to think through your bylaws and have that in place. And even if they're not completely done or you haven't voted on them before you go through with starting your nonprofit, that should be on your agenda and a high priority. The other things you want to think about are important policies you need in place, like a whistleblower policy or a conflict of interest policy. Those policies are what the IRS is very interested in. So you want to make sure that if you know the IRS cares about you having policies and they're going to ask questions about whether you have those policies, that you have them in place. So think about your conflict of interest, document retention, whistleblower, and consider executive compensation policies for your organization. And finally, you need a budget. So before you throw tomatoes at me through the phone or through your TV, please understand that it's important for you to have a budget from the very beginning. So a lot of people in response to hearing me say that will say, well, how do I have a budget if I've never spent anything or we're not doing anything yet? Why would I even have a budget? Well, you got to understand that a budget is a projection of what you hope to do, what you hope to spend. It should be as realistic as possible based on the goals you've set for yourself. So if you know that you want to launch your organization and you know you want to launch your programming, what does that look like? How many people are you going to be serving? Do you need staff to do that? Do you need materials to do that? What is it going to cost for you to actually run your organization in a year's time? You should be asking yourself those questions, and you should be thinking about your budget before you submit any paperwork. And too many times people think about it after the fact. Too many times people get in the rush of filling out the documents and the paperwork, and they get so excited because they accomplished that piece, and then they're like, oh, wait a minute, we need money. Should we get some grants now, or should we do this? What should we do? And that's not a conversation you can afford to have late in the game. That actually should be one of the questions you're asking yourself before you even confirm that you want to start a nonprofit, because you're starting a nonprofit business, and a business needs money to run, and you have to think about where that money is coming from, and you got to be thoughtful about where you think that money's coming from. And it's not enough to just say, oh, we're gonna get some grants, we'll be good. That's not how it works. So you want to have a budget in place that's based on goals you've set for your organization. And believe it or not, the IRS wants you to project 3 years. So it's not just the first year, but think about the first 3 years. And the reason why you have to do this is because when you're applying for 501c3 status, you have the choice between the 1023 EZ or the 1023. The EZ is the streamlined version of the form, and one of the eligibility questions are based on how much money you plan to receive in the first 3 years. Well, how do you know how much money you plan to receive if you haven't budgeted for it, or if you haven't projected it? So they're basically giving you clues about what they want you to do, and you need to know 3 years ahead what your plan is. So have a budget in place. Think about what it's going to take to execute your organization and go from there. If you need help creating your first budget, I have done a video on that. I'm linking that above. But I also have a budgeting masterclass that people really enjoy and has helped a lot of people in creating their budget. If you want that budgeting masterclass, just comment budget below and I will give you the link. Was that helpful? Do you have other pointers for people? There are other things to consider in starting your nonprofit and what you need to have in place, but I wanted to share those 7 things because they are absolutely important for your process. If you have other things to add, go ahead and drop them in the comments below, because we're building a community of people that support each other in their startup journeys. Thank you so much for watching. If you need help with your nonprofit or just securing funding, whether you have a nonprofit or a for-profit, visit me at bossonabudget.com because I have resources there for you. Thank you so much for watching this video, and I'll see you in the next one.